So, hello everybody. There's a question about the problem here, 1510, on relaxation of credit standards. And it's an excellent question. And it basically asks, where does the 25% required rate of return on equal risk investments come in? And I want to go over this problem slowly and carefully. Okay, so let me read the problem. Lewis Enterprises is considering relaxing its credit standards to increase its currently sagging sales. So let's all understand one thing. If it increases, to try to increase its sales, if it relaxes its credit standards, more money will be tied up in accounts receivable because they're going to give people more time to pay their bill, okay? So as a result of the proposed relaxation, sales are expected to increase by 10% from 10,000 to 11,000 units during the coming year. The average collection period is expected to increase from 45 to 60 days. This is the magic number. You notice how the collection period's increasing? Now, this time, money is tied up that they could have taken and done what? Invested that money, okay, at 25%, which is their required rate of return. But they can't do that because they got the money tied up. And bad debts are expected to increase from 1% to 3% of sales. The sales price per unit is $40 and the variable cost is $31. The firm's required return on equal risk investments is 25%. Evaluate the proposed relaxation and make a recommendation to the firm. Now let's think about this for a minute. Let us assume that you had money that you wanted to invest, okay? But you gave the money to your friend because he had a problem, financial problem, right? So you tell him, don't worry about it. Take a month or 2 months to pay me back. Now, what could you have done with that money? You could have invested that money yourself on your required rate of return of 25%, right? But you didn't. You gave it to your friend. So let's go over this problem. And here's the solution, and I'll go over it slowly. To determine the net profit from this proposed change, you need to calculate 3 areas of cost changes. The additional profit contribution from incremental sales, that's the new amount of sales, cost from an increase in average investment and accounts receivable, right? How much it's costing you from all that money being tied up, and cost from an increase in bad debts. It says your bad debts are going to increase, right? I believe from what? 1% to 3%? Let's see if I can move this down a little. Yeah, right there. See that? Okay. So first calculate the additional profit from the extra sales. The additional profit contribution from an increase in sales can be found using the following formula. Proposed sale units minus current sale units, and as we know, there's an extra 1,000 units, right? Times the price per unit minus the variable cost per unit, so it's $9,000, right? 1,000 times $9 is 9,000, as we see here, right? So that's the extra money you're going to make. Now determine the cost from an increase in the average investment and accounts receivable. So that money is going to be tied up now, right? So the average investment and accounts receivable is calculated as follows. Total variable cost of annual sales over turnover of accounts receivable. Okay? And I'll talk more about this equation later because I had another question. Part 2 was about the equation, right? About average investment in accounts receivable. There's a couple of equations. So we could rewrite this equation this way, right? As you see, number of sale units times variable cost. And this is a daily, right? Average collection period, right? So, so this equation goes to this equation. So the average investment and accounts receivable under the present plan is computed as follows. And we do it twice under the present and the, right? Here's the present. You notice under the present plan, and then here is under the proposed plan. So we use this equation right here, right? Twice. The present and the proposed, right? And then we take the difference, right? And then we take the difference. So the marginal investment in accounts receivable is calculated by simply taking the difference between this number and this number. So you'll notice now you have extra money that you could have invested, an extra $17,000, which is tied up in accounts receivable from relaxing your credit standards, right? So your marginal investment in accounts receivable is now $17,836. So the cost from this money being tied up is simply $17,836, which is here, times your required return that you can get if you didn't have that money tied up. So the cost from the increased marginal investment is $4,459. Okay, so then we got the bad debts, right? So we got what it's costing us in bad debts, right? So bad debt expenses under the present plan. And you can go through this carefully, and if you need more help, let me know. And bad debts under the proposed plan. So we got an extra $9,200 we're going to have in bad debts. We've increased the bad debts, right? $9,200. So now we compute the net profit from this new plan. Now, is it a profit or a loss? Let's look. Additional profit contribution, which we calculated, minus the amount money tied up in accounts receivable that we could have invested, right? And then the cost of the bad debt minus $9,200, right? So we have we're in a hole of $46.59. So the loss is $46.59. So we should not recommend this because it provides a loss for us. All right, I hope everybody's clear about that. Go over this carefully. If you're not, email me, and I will answer part 2 of the question that the student asked about different equations for the average investment in accounts receivable. All right, great question. Thank you very much for asking.